class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing a trade made by the San Jose Sharks, which saw them send forward Ozzy Weisblatt to the Nashville Predators in exchange for forward Yegor Afanasyev. Hopefully I'm not butchering that pronunciation. So this ends up being just a minor league player swap, which is the type of trade I wouldn't normally make a video about, but it's made interesting by a couple of facts, the first of which is the difference between these two players over the last few years, and the second of which is the fact that at least Wiseblat is a former first rounder of the organization. So let us talk a bit about that. His history here was a first rounder in the 2020 draft, a year in which the Sharks did not actually have their own first round pick due to the Erik Karlsson trade, and unfortunately this was the first year in which the Sharks saw that massive drop in performance, which ended up with them finishing third last in the entire league, and as such getting the third overall pick, which now belonged to the Ottawa Senators. They drafted Tim Stützle. He's an incredibly productive forward in the NHL currently. Massive missed opportunity for San Jose, but Doug Wilson, watching that season go by, how poorly the Sharks were doing, wanted to at the very least be able to show up for that first day of the draft with a first rounder, and so they end up sending a third round pick along with Barclay Goodrow to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for their first round pick. But the Lightning were one of the best teams in the league at the time and proved themselves to be the best team in the league that year, and as such they won the Stanley Cup, making it so their first rounder was 31st in the draft, the last possible pick of the first round, since this was before the Seattle Kraken had joined the league. At 31st round, the Sharks, they had this big fanfare moment. It was very touching and everything like that. They drafted him in sign language because I believe his mother was deaf. So there was a lot of sort of talking about this selection. And Wiseblatt wasn't necessarily a super off-the-board pick. Nobody really had him in the first round, but he was within the first few-ish selections in a lot of people's drafts for the second round. So it wasn't completely out of the question, but it was definitely a reach. There were a couple of other best player available types of choices that they could have made. For instance, one of them being JJ Peterka, who was expected to be a late first rounder, ended up getting drafted a couple of spots after San Jose made their choice to the Buffalo Sabres, and now he is an incredibly productive player as well in the NHL with over 50 points this past season. But with Wiseblatt, he makes his transition. He plays in the WHL, comes eventually over to the San Jose Barracuda. First year, not really showing much production. But of course, what you want to see from your young players is a steady trajectory upwards. Maybe if you don't have a great season, as long as you're taking a couple of steps forward for the next year, you're showing some level of improvement. But Wiseblatt never really did this. He stayed pretty stagnant. In fact, there was perhaps an argument that he was actually getting worse as time passed. He would even spend some time in the third tier league for the San Jose Sharks with the Wichita Thunder in the ECHL. By the end of this season, when it continued to just not really have much production at the AHL level for Wiseblatt, he would end up getting loaned to the Milwaukee Admiral, the AHL affiliate of the Nashville Predators, and he's been there for the last few months. In fact, he's been participating in the playoffs with the Admiral as they made it to the Final Four of the Calder Cup playoffs in the AHL, which makes this trade pretty interesting because the Predators have been able to view these two players together for the last few months, and they have made the conscious decision to go with Wiseblatt instead of Afanasyev. But let us talk a bit about Afanasyev, because while Wiseblatt's production has been incredibly stagnant and if not kind of bad over these last few years, he is the exact opposite. His first full season in the AHL was decently successful. He had over 30 points in the full year that he had played, which is already better than anything Wiseblatt has ever put up. The following year was relatively stagnant, perhaps you could argue a couple of steps forward, but this past season for the Admiral, it's been a massive step forward for Afanasyev. Not only did he over double his point totals and double his goal totals of the past season, but he was also the leading scorer on the Admiral. Obviously, with the Barracuda, they're a very bad team. It's more difficult to score, while the Admiral have a lot of great players. That's why they're able to make it this far in the AHL playoffs. But the fact that he is the leading scorer is definitely proof that he has been very, very good. On top of that, he's even had some NHL excursions, a couple of games with the Nashville Predators, a relatively competitive team who made the playoffs this past season. He played 2 games with them. The previous year, he played 17 NHL games, including his first career goal, and this is a situation in which Wiseblatt never even got remotely close to. Like I said, he was much closer to playing and did play in the third-tier ECHL league than actually reaching the NHL. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, there's so much more production here for Afanasyev. There must be some sort of catch to it. Perhaps he's a very small player who, is like 5'8", 5'9", and he's never really going to be able to make that jump to the NHL, or perhaps he's significantly older than Wiseblat, so this is about the ceiling of what we're actually going to get out of him. But neither of those things are the case. For one, he is older than Wiseblat, but only by a single year. Was a second-round pick in the 2019 draft, which means he's only, I believe, 24 years of age, or at least it will be 24 years of age come next season. So that's not all that much further along than Wiseblat. And then in terms of his size, he is 6'4" and a decent bit above 200 pounds. This is not an easy to push off the puck type of player. This guy can eventually make that transition to the NHL. So it seems as though it is a pure upside trade for San Jose. But like I mentioned earlier, both of these players have been in the Predators organization for the last few months. Both of them have been playing with the Milwaukee Admiral through their playoff push. They actually both ended up putting up the same amount of points over that time. In 15 games, both had 9 points, though Afanasyev had the edge in terms of goal scoring, which is perhaps slightly more valuable, but yet the Predators said, I would rather have Wiseblat on my team than I would have Afanasyev. So the Sharks say, you know what, we'll take that swap. They end up with what looks to be on paper the better player. So it seems as though it's a pretty big win for San Jose. I'm not entirely sure if Afanasyev is really going to factor much into the San Jose Sharks for this upcoming season, and perhaps never even necessarily for the future. But the fact that he has this high level of production not only means that he could break in with the San Jose Sharks at some point if he continues this upward trajectory, but what it also means is that this is going to be a massive boost to the San Jose Barracuda, who have been struggling over the last couple of years. And it is no secret that Wiseblat has not really been helping that team do much of anything besides lose games, perhaps. And the fact that now the leading scorer of one of the best AHL teams is coming over to the AHL, will likely play a full season there next year with perhaps a couple of move-ups to the NHL if he's doing very, very well, does mean great things. And so after a pretty bad move, I think many people thought, with Mike Greer picking up Barclay Goodrow off of waivers, Greer seems to get right back into the W column with this trade. Class dismissed.